The man stood there, a gun aimed straight at my wife's chest. She didn't flinch, and not even a blink. Instead, she raised a single eyebrow and calmly asked, "Are you really sure you want to do that, officer?" What he didn't realize was that this wasn't just my wife standing in the doorway. It was Sheriff Rebecca Monroe. And this fool had just made the worst mistake of his pathetic little HOA existence. It all began with the mailbox. A petty, bright orange note taped carelessly to the front as if it was desperate to be noticed from space. The message was simple: notice of non-compliance. Mailbox paint does not meet regulations. Correct within 72 hours to avoid citation. No phone number, just a stamped logo reading East Summit Neighborhood Safety Board, or something straight out of a cheesy horror flick. We had only lived here for 5 days. Boxes were still unopened in the garage. The only thing I'd done was mow the lawn and wrestle with the smart thermostat settings. I stared at that note for a long moment, unsure if it was some dumb welcome prank or a genuine intimidation attempt. Rebecca found me standing there, coffee growing cold in hand. "They don't like our mailbox," I muttered. She raised one eyebrow, skimmed the paper, and then tilted her head just enough to make me chuckle. "What's the regulation color for mailbox paint?" "We just moved in," she asked. I tossed the notice aside and forgot about it until another arrived 2 days later. This one was more serious. Vehicle violation, driveway parking obstruction, fine $125. Repeat offenses may result in escalation. Rebecca's SUV was parked right in our driveway. I am not blocking the sidewalk, not facing the wrong way. I just parked. Did we unknowingly buy into a gated community? I joked. Rebecca didn't reply. Instead, she was already pulling up our real estate documents on her laptop. She was like that, quiet and focused whenever she smelled something fishy. I leaned over her shoulder, sipping my reheated coffee as she scrolled to the fine print. There it was, bold as day: "This property is not subject to any active homeowners association." I whistled low. Then who the hell are these East Summit Neighborhood Safety Board people? Rebecca didn't say a word. She bookmarked the section and saved the document as evidence. No ho. Still, I wasn't convinced it was serious, or maybe just an overzealous neighbor with too much time and a clipboard. But things escalated the next morning. I was outside pruning the hedge, trying to make the place feel like home, when I spotted a man across the street taking pictures, and not casual snapshots, but aiming a camera with a telephoto lens right at our garage. He wore a badge on his chest and radio clipped to his belt, but something about him seemed off. 2 clean boots, a shiny badge, and a belt that looked like it came from a costume shop. He noticed me watching and strutted over, chest puffed up like a cheap deputy. "Afternoon," he said. "I'm Sergeant Daniels with the East Summit Neighborhood Safety Board." I wiped the sweat off my forehead and smiled. "I didn't know we had a neighborhood safety board." He nodded seriously and pulled a laminated card from his back pocket. It looked official for a split second until I caught the expiration date, December 2021. It was 2025 now. He continued, "We handle compliance issues at Community Harmony. You've had a few violations already." I cocked my head. "So you're like an HO?" "We're better than that," he replied. "More responsive, less red tape." Then he dropped the bomb, "We'll need to inspect your garage." I actually laughed. "No way. Unless you've got a warrant or a time machine to fix that expired badge, you need to move along." His eyes narrowed. "Non-cooperation will be noted," he warned, pulling out a pad to jot something down. I went inside, locked the door, and told Rebecca everything. She didn't laugh. Instead, she pulled up a county land use map, cross-checked it with the East Summit plat, and confirmed what we were already starting to suspect: this neighborhood safety board didn't legally exist. No tax filings, no incorporation, no non-profit status. Just a name slapped on a few printed citations and some cheap badges. Rebecca called the county clerk. I reached out to a friend in code enforcement. Both confirmed the same thing: no HO, no registered neighborhood watch. Whatever this was, it was rogue. "This is fraud," I said flat out. "Impersonating authority." "It's harassment," Rebecca added. opening a blank document titled Board Watch Initial Report. They're not going to stop. That's when we decided to play along. I wanted to storm the sheriff's office and blow it wide open. But Rebecca, ever the strategist, insisted we gather more evidence. That familiar sparklet eraser, the one I'd seen a dozen times when she led corruption investigations as the youngest sheriff in the county's history. Let them think we're just suburban sheep, she said. We'll set a trap. You handle the cameras. I'll keep their log. By that night, we had 4 motion-activated cameras set up, one above the garage, one in the eaves watching the driveway, another hidden in the mailbox post, and one tucked inside a porch lantern. Rebecca printed every violation we received and started marking dates and times on a whiteboard in the basement. By day 4, we caught him again, Daniels, walking up to our porch like he owned the place, snapping photos of our trash bins, measuring the distance between hedges and curb with a tape measure. He looked around nervously, like he knew what he was doing was wrong but not quite wrong enough to stop. Then he pulled out a little black folder and he left another bright orange notice taped to the door. This one read, "Final warning, non-compliant landscaping, immediate correction required." That was the breaking point. That night, I watched the footage over and over 3 times, slowing it down, pausing, zooming in. His badge was aluminum. You could see our porch light reflecting off the cheap engraving. Rebecca froze the frame and zoomed in on the radio clipped to his belt. "That's not a police radio," she whispered. "It's a Bofang programmable, unregistered." She leaned back, folding her arms. "He's not just faking being HOA, he's pretending to be law enforcement." A chill ran down my spine. "That's a felony." Rebecca nodded. "And he just committed it on our porch in front of a camera while trespassing." We uploaded the video to a secure drive and started backing up our logs. 2 days later, another man from the so-called board appeared, this time snapping photos through the slats of our backyard fence. That was when it clicked. This wasn't random, it was a pattern, organized and coordinated. Rebecca began mapping every incident: mailbox, vehicle, landscaping, trespassing. Each violation cited the same language: board, neighborhood safety mandate, violation. None of it had any legal footing, but all of it was dressed up to seem official. "They're manufacturing the illusion of authority," she said, "counting on people not to question it." "They picked the wrong house," I said, staring at the paused image of Sergeant Daniels approaching our door, his plastic badge catching the light. Rebecca smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the same look she used to give suspects just before they realized who'd set them up. "He has no clue who I am," she said. "It's time we changed that." They returned on a Sunday, not with a knock or a warning, but with traffic cones, clipboards, and a megaphone, treating us like trespassers on our own property. I was halfway through trimming the hedges when I heard gravel crunch behind me. I turned to see a rusted grey SUV reversing into our driveway. 2 orange cones were tossed onto the concrete as if to mark a crime scene. "Attention homeowners," a voice boomed through a squeaky old megaphone. "This property is under active inspection by the East Summit Neighborhood Safety Board. Please remain inside until the assessment is complete." Rebecca appeared at the screen door, wiping her hands on a dish towel, blinking like she'd just heard a raccoon order breakfast through a drive-through speaker. "Are they serious?" she asked, though her tone was already sharpening. The SUV's doors opened in perfect unison, and out stepped 3 men in faded tactical pants and polos that looked like they were bought in bulk from a militia-themed Etsy shop. Right in the center was our old friend Sergeant Daniels, clipboard in hand, flanked by 2 deputies who looked like they'd flunked out of mall security training. They wore earpieces that weren't plugged into anything, and utility belts loaded with what I later identified as a laser pointer, a walkie-talkie, and a multi-tool clipped like it was some kind of badge of honor. I walked toward them calmly, phone already in hand recording. "You're blocking my driveway," I said, voice steady, thumb tapping the record button. "We have a legal right to inspect non-compliant properties," Daniels announced, raising his clipboard like it was a warrant. "You've violated 3 mandates: hedge height, improper trash bin storage, and unauthorized signage. The signage was a small wooden welcome sign Rebecca had picked up at a craft fair, hanging near the door. "There's no HOA here," I reminded him. "You're trespassing." One of his backup guys stepped forward, hand on hip. "Sir, I'm going to need to see your ID." I blinked. Before I could respond, a round-faced man wearing a chest rig full of pens and carrying a suspiciously unlabeled pepper spray started filming us with his phone. "Subject appears agitated," he muttered into a microphone that wasn't plugged in. "Non-cooperative male, possibly armed." I looked down at my pruning shears and back at the camera. "Really?" Rebecca had now stepped outside. Calm as the moon, she leaned against the porch railing, watching silently as Daniels strutted forward and reached for his badge. That's when she noticed the design was all wrong. The emblem etched in the center wasn't just cheap, it was a distorted, low-resolution version of our actual county sheriff's badge. The star had 6 points instead of 7, the eagle was reversed, and the font was laughably mismatched. But it wasn't just a bad fake here. They weren't mimicking some fantasy community watch. No, they were impersonating her department. Rebecca said nothing yet. Her eyes narrowed, not in anger but in sharp calculation. She looked at Daniels as if sizing him up for a coffin. I recognized that look. "You boys always just show up on private property flashing that?" she asked sweetly. Daniels straightened up. "This badge gives me authority in this neighborhood." Rebecca gave a polite smile. "Interesting." We let them dig their own graves. They snapped more photos of our garage, measured the distance from the porch to the curb like they acted like they were planning a military operation, handing us a paper listing fines, stapled to a pamphlet titled Community Code Book, Summit Edition. No author, no date, no citations, just bold headers and threats. That night, we added the video footage to our growing archive. "They tried to fake my badge," Rebecca said quietly. "That's no longer just trespassing, that's a second-degree felony under county law. Maybe more, if they're using it to extort residents." And extortion was exactly what we uncovered. Over the next week, neighbors started confiding in us. Ellen, 2 doors down, whispered at the grocery store that she'd been fined $150 for excessive decorative lighting around her porch. Jim from the cul-de-sac showed us a notice for prohibited yard flags after hanging a football banner. A family on the corner had their kids' trampoline tagged with a bright pink violation for non-approved recreational structures. These weren't just bogus rulers, they were turning the entire neighborhood into a scam. Most folks around here were older, retired, and too polite to push back. They were scared. Rebecca set up an encrypted Google Drive to archive every document, photo, and interview. Faces blurred, identities protected, but the names of the enforcers left unredacted. Daniels, Hollowell, every one of them sported badges that mimicked the sheriff's office down to the stitching on their patches. Meanwhile, fake violation letters kept arriving, and now by mail. Probably because they feared our cameras catching them again. They were growing bolder. One letter accused us of willful obstruction of community harmony, citing a bogus statute, East Summit Code 14.3b. We cross-checked it. It didn't exist anywhere in any legal code. It was pure fiction. That's when Rebecca said, "Time to go to the meeting." Every month, the self-appointed board held a public engagement session at the clubhouse down the hill, an old rec center left over from when the area actually had an HOA in the early 2000s. The HOA had long since been dissolved, something we verified, but the board had simply taken over the space. That night, we walked in calmly. About a dozen folding chairs, a projector, and a man at the front wielding a pointer and a fanny pack stuffed with printed forms. Daniels sat on the far side, leaning against the wall, smug as a cat with a mouthful of feathers. The board president, a tall, thin man with slick back hair and a voice dripping with used car salesman greasy, stood in the middle of the room. "Thank you all for coming," he announced. "Tonight, we'll be voting on new vehicle restrictions, fence height adjustments, and monthly compliance evaluations." "Hold up," I said, raising a hand. "Who exactly gave you the authority to propose these?" The man blinked. "We're the Neighborhood Safety Board. sir. Elected by whom? Rebecca asked. The man bristled. We don't need elections. We're volunteers maintaining community order. Order, Rebecca repeated, pulling a paper from her folder. Then maybe you'd like to explain this. She held up a photo of the fake badger Daniel's badge. The room shifted. The projector hummed. Silence. Daniel stood abruptly. We don't answer to civilians, he snapped. We enforce the rules. If you've got a problem with that, I do, Rebecca said firmly. Daniel stepped forward. The room grew tense. People leaned in, sensing something was about to explode. Then he reached into his belt and pulled out what looked like a firearm. Later, we learned it was a plitgunner, a training tool, but in that moment, it didn't look fake. He pointed it at my wife. Back up, he said. Meeting's over. A chair scraped back. People gasped. Someone screamed. I froze. Rebecca didn't. She took one slow step forward and said calmly, I'm Sheriff Rebecca Monroe. Put down the weapon. Daniel's mouth dropped open. The badge in his hand suddenly looked like a child's toy. You're lying. Want to test that theory? She asked. My dispatch is on speed dial. They're waiting for my check-in right now. That gun in your hand just turned from trespassing to armed criminal impersonation. He hesitated, blinked, shook, then dropped it. It clattered to the floor with a sad clack, and the entire room exhaled. Rebecca didn't even glance at it. She stepped past him, took the projector remote from the board president, and switched off the screen. This board is dissolved, she announced, effective immediately. No one dared to disagree. You could have heard a pin drop. One moment, Sergeant Daniels stood there, weapon aimed at my wife's chest puffed out like he expected applause. The next, he was the one holding his breath. Rebecca hadn't raised her voice or reached for anything. She just took one slow, deliberate step forward, leveled her gaze at him like ordering lunch, and said the words that flipped the whole room upside down. I'm Sheriff Rebecca Monroe. Put the weapon down. Time seemed to warp in that instant. Daniel blinked twice, mouth slightly open, like he was struggling to process English in real time. You could see it, the flicker of dawning horror when someone realizes they've just made a catastrophic mistake. The plit gun in his hand suddenly looked radioactive. His fingers twitched, his knees locked. For a moment, I honestly thought he might bolt. But Rebecca didn't move. She calmly reached for the radio clipped inside her coat and pressed the button. Dispatch. This is Monroe. I'm at East Summit Community Center. Suspect impersonating law enforcement, possibly armed. Request immediate response. Advise all units a subject may be part of an organized impersonation ring. Copy. The radio crackled. Copy. Sheriff units en route. ETA 5 minutes. Confirm suspect in custody. Not yet, she replied evenly. Daniel's hand went limp like a rusty hinge, and the gun dropped with a loud clatter onto the laminate tile. Someone in the back gasped, the only sound since Rebecca spoke. He stepped back, hands raised, and for the first time all night, he looked small. Rebecca didn't gloat. She didn't yell. She didn't even touch him. She simply pointed at the folding chair he'd been sitting in earlier and said, "Sit." And like a kicked dog, he obeyed. The rest of the room fell apart like soggy cardboard. The board president stumbled backward into the projector screen. One of the deputies, tangled in his own tactical belt, clumsily tried to inch towards the exit. People stood up, whispering, recording on their phones. I caught an older man, maybe mid-70s, just shaking his head, mumbling about how something smelled fishy with those damn cones. The board's treasurer tried to play it casual, like maybe none of this was her problem, like maybe she just happened to be there to watch a slideshow about hedge regulations. Rebecca wasn't having it. Mom, she said, turning sharply to her, don't move. We'll be sorting all this out when backup arrives. I didn't know, the woman stammered. They just told me we were allowed to help out volunteer patrols. I didn't know a broken bar. You didn't know you were issuing printed fines with no legal standing? Or trespassing on private property with fake badges? Rebecca asked calmly, but her words hit like hammers. Ignorance doesn't make it legal. 10 minutes later, the place was swarming with real deputies in black uniforms, flashing lights outside, tactical vests, and stern faces. They came in like a hurricane of law and order, and not guns drawn yet, but with unmistakable purpose. Daniel was cuffed and escorted to the back of a cruiser immediately. The pellet gun was tagged and bagged. One deputy took Rebecca's statement while another started collecting IDs from every near vests or badges. Didn't matter. And yes, they all had badges and none issued by any official department, just shiny plastic printed and clipped to their belts like Halloween costumes. The worst part? They'd gone all in. Laminated IDs, little booklets full of community ordinances, even a roster of residents with color-coded threat levels. I know this because one deputy, a young guy named Ortiz, held it up like a trophy. "You've got to see this," he muttered to Rebecca. They were tracking people like a gang unit. One section labeled non-cooperative residents listed names, addresses, and infraction tallies. Ours had 9 violations: crime spree, mailbox, color park vehicle, unapproved flag, trash bin day violation, non-standard welcome sign, excessive lawn watering, hostile demeanor. That one even had 2 stars, and finally a possible false ID claim. Spouse may be impersonating officer. I kid you not. They'd accused Rebecca of impersonating herself. She smirked as she read that. "That's a new one," she said. "I've arrested bank managers who were more subtle." Deputy Rayner, who'd worked with Rebecca for 7 years, came over holding his phone. "Mom," he said, "one of the IDs we scanned matches a known offender. Guy calls himself the board's security chief, a Bryce McCr. Did 3 years downstate for impersonating a public official." Rebecca didn't even blink. Add another charge to his file. They'd barely scratched the surface. As more statements poured in, it became clear, this wasn't just a few cranky neighbors playing dress-up. This was an organized racket. Fake citations were mailed weekly. Residents paid fines through a digital portal that linked to a PayPal account registered under Essensburg East Summit Neighborhood Safety Board. Guess whose name was on the account? The board president's nephew, a 25-year-old freelance graphic designer from a nearby town. And that wasn't all. One deputy flagged a van parked behind the community center. Inside were boxes of printed warning slips, traffic cones, violation packets, and a literal binder labeled escalation protocols. The instructions inside made my skin crawl. Stage 1, verbal notices. Stage 2, written citations. Stage 3, confrontation. Stage 4, tactical deterrent. Tactical deterrent. They had instructions for calmly but assertively brandishing weapons to enforce compliance. I nearly threw up. All these are right here, in a suburban neighborhood where the worst crime in the last year had been a raccoon breaking into someone's pantry. Rebecca managed the intake at a corner table, flipping through statements and IDs with a face carved from stone. She wasn't smiling. This wasn't a we know it was cleanup. The worst kind. The betrayal of trust kind. Because these people weren't just harassing you, so they were extorting retirees and targeting single moms. One neighbor confessed they'd paid over $900 in fabricated fines out of fear of eviction. Another received warnings about excessive gatherings after hosting a birthday party for their 10-year-old. This fake, ego-driven enforcement committee weaponized their image into fear and made real money doing it. We didn't know the full extent yet, and not then. But as deputies loaded boxes into cruisers and confiscated hard drives from the community center's tiny office, Rebecca turned to me. "They weren't pretending to be a homeowners association," she said quietly. "They were pretending to be me." I said nothing, just put my arm around her shoulder and squeezed. She wasn't shaken, and not really. She was angry. Angry like an earthquake that hadn't cracked the surface yet. As the cruisers pulled away, tail lights disappearing into the night, one thing was clear. East Summit would never be the same. The neighbors who once kept the peace, the neighbors who'd once kept their heads down, were now wide awake. The paper-thin facade of the safety board had been peeled back to reveal something far worse: a cartel of petty tyrants dressed up in shiny badges and khakis. The only good news: they were all on file, charged, booked, and very, very exposed. It started with a flyer. Nothing flashy, just a simple white sheet taped to every mailbox, every lamppost, every community board from East Summit to Maple Ridge. Community Town Hall A Know Your Rights. Led by Sheriff Rebecca Monroe. No frilly fonts, no fake logos, no fabricated mandates, just plain truth printed in bold black ink. The moment those flyers went up, you could feel the shift in the air. That cautious hush that had settled over the neighborhood for months, of the whispering about warnings and fines, the closed front doors, drawn blinds started to lift. Slowly, almost hesitantly, folks came out of their houses, gathered on sidewalks, leaned over fences, murmuring to each other. Are you going to the town hall? Is it safe now? Did you hear? They really arrested that guy, the fake sergeant. The night of the meeting, the community center parking lot was full by 6:30. Cars lined the curb, down the hill, on the next block. Some folks carried folding chairs, others brought their kids. I spotted a dozen faces I recognized from earlier altercations, of people who had once dodged eye contact or refused to talk out of fear. Now they came in pairs, in groups, some clutching printed violations in manila envelopes, others with notebooks ready to take names. Rebecca entered last. No sneaking in through the side. No civvies like during those fake board meetings. No, this time she came in full uniform, a sheriff's badge polished, gun holstered, silver stars gleaming on her collar. When she stepped up to the podium, the room didn't erupt in applause. It didn't need to. It went dead silent, like a courtroom just before a verdict. She started with the basics. My name is Sheriff Rebecca Monroe, she said, voice steady, carrying to every corner of the room. I live here. I've been living here for 6 months. You've probably seen me walking my dog. You've probably also seen some men and women walking around this neighborhood in fake uniforms, or issuing fake fines, threatening real consequences. There were nods, murmurs. Someone in the back whispered, finally. Rebecca continued, let me be absolutely clear. There is no legally recognized HOA operating in East Summit. There is no neighborhood safety board, and there is no authority whatsoever behind the citations, inspections, or tactical enforcement many of you have experienced over the past year. She stepped aside and motioned to the table beside her, where Deputy Ortiz had laid out the evidence. Photos, documents, a display board labeled the grifter how they did it. Itemized fines. Fake badge replicas. Even one of the plastic vests with board enforcement printed across the chest in cracked vinyl. This, Rebecca said, holding up a printed violation for non-standard porch DA tilde copyright core, was issued to an 84-year-old woman because she hung a wind chime that made too much noise. She was told if she didn't pay within 72 hours, her house would be subject to a compliance lockout. That's not just gruel, it's illegal. There were gasps, real ones, not theatrical, not for effect. People weren't just learning about the con, they were realizing they'd been conned. Rebecca explained the charges next. How Sergeant Daniel's surreal name Gregory Daltona was now facing felony impersonation, criminal trespass, attempted assault with a weapon, and fraud. How the board president, Leonard Brandt, had siphoned over $32,000 in fake fine revenue into personal accounts. And how investigators uncovered plans to expand the operation to 3 neighboring communities using the same fake HOA blueprint. They're building an empire of fear, she said. And they're doing it door by door, one fake warning at a time. The crowd was silent again, and not out of fear this time, but anger. Cold, steady, slow-burning anger. Rebecca let it settle before delivering the final piece. Every person who paid a fine will receive restitution. Every victim who was threatened, harassed, or filmed without consent will be contacted by our office. And every neighbor who cooperates with this investigation will be protected under our witness coordination unit. This is not over. This is just beginning. A man near the front, a Mr. Pallet Jennings, whose wife had cried when they were threatened with lien notices, stood up. Sheriff, what do we do if someone tries this again? Rebecca didn't even blink. You call me. After the town hall, people didn't just file out after the meeting. They lingered. They talked. For the first time since we'd moved in, neighbors were smiling at each other without the usual suspicion. Rebecca stood outside for over an hour, shaking hands, listening to stories, jotting down names. A teenage boy handed her a bogus citation his family had gotten her for unlicensed sports equipment because they'd left a soccer net in their yard. She promised she'd take care of it. A retired couple handed her a printed home mandate they'd been told to tape in their window under threat of enforcement escalation. Don't throw it out, she told them. We're building a case. And build it she did. Within 2 weeks, every single member of the so-called safety board had been served with formal notices. 3 were arrested. 5 more were hit with civil penalties. Even the guy who printed their fake badges, an Etsy seller from out of town who thought he was making props for a costume party, was questioned. The East Summit domain seized by the county. The PayPal account frozen. And the rec center, it now had a real community watch sign outside, courtesy of the sheriff's department, run not by vigilantes in khakis but by actual neighbors, volunteers, people who knocked first, people who didn't point anything in your face. As for Sergeant Daniel's surreal name Gregory Daltona, his perp walk happened the following Friday morning, right past our driveway. I was outside trimming the hedge when the unmarked cruiser rolled up. He stepped out in cuffs, still wearing the same fake vest he'd worn that first day, now torn and dirty, like a bad Halloween costume at the end of a long night. I didn't say anything, just watched as 2 deputies walked him down the sidewalk, past our mailbox, past the exact spot where he once slapped a violation on our gate. A bright red duct tape, bold black letters, final warning, landscape non-compliance. Rebecca had that sign framed. It hangs behind her desk now, in her office. Above it, in thick hand-painted block letters, nice try. People laugh when they see it. Our visitors, reporters, deputies. It became local law, a quiet reminder that the best revenge isn't always louder, it's lasting. Some neighbors still keep their porch lights on a little later now. Others leave their blinds half open instead of snapped shut. A few houses even banded together and threw a block party on the anniversary of the takedown. They called it Freedom from Fines Friday. Rebecca brought cookies. I brought a Bluetooth speaker and blasted AC/DC. No citations were issued. Just laughter. These days, the kids call her the sheriff of suburbia. And honestly, I think she kind of likes it. But it's more than a nickname. It's a message that no matter how quiet a neighborhood seems, someone's always paying attention. Someone's always keeping score. And if you're foolish enough to